Federico Faggin, celebrated for his role in the invention of the microprocessor, was not always a man immersed in spirituality or consciousness. For decades, his brilliant mind was devoted entirely to scientific and technological rationalism. Yet, at the height of his professional success, when everything in his life seemed perfectly in place, a deep and unexpected existential crisis hurled him into the abyss of inner emptiness. It was then that suffering emerged as a hidden teacher. What for others might have been a time of fulfillment became for Faggin a period of desolation and unanswered questions. Pain forced him to look inward, challenging everything he had considered true up until that moment. The ideas that had underpinned his life, success, logic, matter as the foundation of reality, collapsed in the face of a profound sense of disconnection from himself. This rupture was not an accident. It marked the beginning of his path towards awakening. The dark night of the soul is not merely a poetic metaphor, but a concrete experience. Faggin began to feel alienated from his superficial identity. He no longer recognized himself in his achievements, his public image, or his recurring thoughts. What arose in the midst of that darkness was a silent force, an inner voice urging him to discover who he truly was. Pain thus became a threshold. It was not a punishment, but a door. In stepping through that door, he found himself stripped of familiar signposts, as though walking through a vast and uncharted landscape within. Each step was uncertain, yet filled with a strange magnetic pull towards something beyond his comprehension. The absence of answers became paradoxically the first real invitation to discover a truth beyond thought. One day, in the depths of his crisis, Faggin had an experience that would change his life forever. It was a moment of pure clarity, an indescribable epiphany in which he simply knew that he existed. Not as an engineer, nor as a thinker, nor as a biological entity. He simply knew that he was. This revelation of the I Am did not emerge from an idea, but from a direct, immediate experience that transcended all conceptualization. It was the certainty of presence, the recognition of consciousness stripped bare of all content. Such an experience cannot be precisely explained, for it belongs to the realm of pure lived reality. Yet those who have undergone it often describe it as the most real moment of their lives. Faggin had not sought it, yet he received it. In that instant, he understood that the deepest knowledge is not found outside, in objects or theories, but within, in one's own consciousness. The I Am was neither a thought nor an emotion. It was a living, indivisible presence, more real than anything around him. This awakening connected him to a dimension of himself that had remained hidden beneath layers of conditioning, beliefs, and automatisms. The scientist met the mystic, not as opposites, but as reflections of the same quest, the search for truth. The revelation shook him. For years he had sought answers in the external world, in matter, in equations. Now he discovered that the center of all authentic knowledge was within. Suffering had not been a curse, but a guide to this revelation. As he himself would later affirm, pain is often the only tool capable of breaking the shell of the ego and allowing the light of being to emerge. From that point, Faggin began a new stage of his life. His mind remained active, but it was no longer his sole compass. His inner experience now held the same importance as his intellect. He had found within his own consciousness a universe as vast and mysterious as the cosmos he had once sought to understand through physics. And most astonishingly, that inner universe was not separate from the outer world. They were two faces of the same reality. Thus the path of pain was transformed into the path of awakening. The experience of the I Am not only restored meaning to his life, but also reshaped his way of understanding the universe. From then on, his work would no longer be guided solely by technical knowledge, but by a deeper quest: the integration of science, consciousness, and meaning. This shift was not a quiet adjustment, but a profound reorientation, as though the axis of his life had been moved. The questions he now pursued were not about how to control or manipulate reality, but how to live in harmony with it. Science became not just a tool, but a companion on a shared journey with the inner self. At this crossroads, Faggin began to glimpse the true potential of the human being. After his inner awakening, Federico Faggin began to experience his own consciousness as something more than a flow of thoughts and emotions. What at first seemed like an isolated mystical experience gradually revealed a more complex and subtle structure of being. It was in this way that two fundamental aspects of his identity emerged: the experiencing self and the observing self. At first, he noticed this division only in rare moments of quiet, such as during a solitary walk or while watching the sunset. But gradually, the awareness began to permeate his daily life, appearing in conversations, in moments of stress, and even in the midst of professional decisions. It became a constant, subtle reminder of a deeper truth. The experiencing self is the one that lives each moment directly. It feels, perceives, reacts. It is the part of us immersed in the present that cries, laughs, marvels, and trembles. It engages with the world immediately. It does not analyze, it moves through life. For Faggin, this self represents the living core of existence, the direct channel through which consciousness manifests in the world. The observing self, on the other hand, is the witnessing consciousness. It does not identify with thoughts, emotions, or perceptions. It simply observes. It is that inner silence that can watch the flow of the mind without being carried away by it. This aspect of being allowed Faggin to recognize himself beyond the content of his experience. He discovered that there was a part of him that never changed, that remained intact and present at all times. Both selves coexist, but are often obscured by the constant activity of the ego. For most of his life, Faggin had lived identified with the experiencing self, but from a perspective conditioned by his intellect, his education, his beliefs. His awakening allowed him to notice that behind every experience there was an attentive presence, lucid and free from judgment. That presence was the observing self, a consciousness that does not need to act to be real. The relationship between these two aspects of being is not one of opposition, but of complementarity. The experiencing self is the dynamic expression of consciousness, while the observing self is its silent root. Together they form a dance, living and witnessing. This apparent duality led Faggin to understand that human consciousness is not a function of the brain, but a primary dimension that sustains all experience. To explain this inner structure, Faggin proposed an analogy with the theatre. The experiencing self would be the actor on stage, fully immersed in the role, feeling every emotion, living the drama with intensity. The observing self, by contrast, would be the silent spectator seated in the audience, watching the play without confusing himself with it. Both are necessary. Without the actor, there is no play. Without the spectator, there is no awareness of the play. This distinction transformed his way of relating to reality. He began to recognize when he was acting from an automatic identification with thoughts or emotions, and when he was anchored in his observing consciousness. He discovered that many of his reactions were impulses of the ego, conditioned repetitions that pulled him away from his authentic self. Only by remembering himself as the observer could he break that cycle and act from inner freedom. Furthermore, This recognition allowed him to understand suffering from a new perspective. When one identifies completely with the experiencing self, pain seems absolute and inescapable. But by remembering the presence of the observing self, suffering does not disappear, but it is experienced with more space, with less attachment. One ceases to be the pain and becomes the witness of the pain, opening the door to profound transformation. This discovery was not merely another idea lodged in his intellect, it was a reconfiguration of his identity. Faggin no longer saw himself as a fixed, separate individual, but as a multidimensional consciousness, capable of experiencing and observing, of acting and reflecting, of feeling and transcending. This new vision of the human being became the foundation for his later reflections on consciousness, science, and spirituality. Thus, the path towards self-knowledge was not only about looking outward, but refining the ability to look inward, to listen to the murmur of consciousness behind each experience. In recognizing this, he also understood that such awareness was not his alone, but a universal potential within every human being. By nurturing the dialogue between the experiencer and the observer, anyone could begin to live with greater clarity, compassion, and authenticity. This was, for him, the beginning of true inner freedom. In that sacred intimacy between the self that lives and the self that observes, Faggin found an inner compass to navigate the mystery of human existence. What if time and space were not the foundation of reality, but merely its effect? This is the radical proposal Federico Faggin puts forward by inverting the traditional conception of modern physics. In his search to understand the nature of consciousness, Faggin reaches a bold assertion. Space-time is not the stage upon which life unfolds, but a construction derived from consciousness itself. According to Faggin, consciousness is neither a byproduct of matter nor a mere neuronal illusion. On the contrary, it is the primary source, the foundation of what is real. Such a claim challenges centuries of scientific thought, calling into question the assumption that physical laws and measurable quantities form the ultimate bedrock of existence. It suggests that what we perceive as fixed constants or universal truths might, in fact, be provisional arrangements, patterns shaped by the creative and interpretive capacities of consciousness itself, ever adapting to new modes of awareness. This perspective places consciousness as the cause, not the consequence, which completely rearranges the relationship between the objective and the subjective. From this viewpoint, the physical universe is a reflection, a manifestation of internal processes of meaning that originate in the immaterial. How then does this creation of space-time from consciousness take shape? Faggin explains that the act of perceiving, of differentiating and interpreting, generates a symbolic structure that shapes our experience of the world. This experience is organized within what he calls a network of meanings, which not only encodes information, but also provides direction and purpose. This network is not located in physical space, but in a semantic domain, unobservable by the traditional senses, yet entirely real in terms of inner lived experience. In this way, time and space emerge as forms for organizing experience. They do not exist in themselves, but arise from the need to articulate the sense and continuity of the conscious flow. The feeling that time moves forward, or that we occupy a place in space, is ultimately a semantic interpretation, a way of translating the inner dynamics of consciousness into a narrative the experiencing self can comprehend. This vision departs from Newtonian and relativistic ideas in which space-time is seen as an absolute container or a curvature produced by masses. For Faggin, not even quantum or relativistic equations touch the heart of the matter, because they completely omit the creative role of consciousness. Rather than studying particles as if they existed in an objective void, he proposes that every phenomenon is a symbolic expression that only gains meaning within a field of consciousness that encompasses it and gives it coherence. The experience of the here and now is therefore a profoundly conscious phenomenon that does not require anchoring in an external reality. The here is the symbolic location of our attention, and the now is the way our consciousness unifies experience. This understanding transforms our relationship with reality, suggesting that we are not objects within the universe, but that the universe is happening within us. The philosophical impact of this idea is profound. If space and time are internal constructions, so too are our divisions between past, present, and future, between inside and outside, between self and others. All are part of a symbolic dance created by consciousness in order to experience and to know itself. Faggin does not deny the existence of the physical world, but reinterprets it as a functional interface, a control panel that allows conscious entities to interact with one another and with their own experiences. Matter, in this view, is a condensed form of meaningful information, a symbol with purpose. The universe, then, is more akin to a symphony of meanings than to a deterministic machine. This new vision not only revolutionizes our understanding of the cosmos, but also issues a call. If consciousness is creative, each of us possesses an immense potential for transformation. It invites a shift in how we live day to day, encouraging us to see each interaction, challenge, and moment of reflection as an act of co-creation with the fabric of reality itself. Such a shift could dissolve rigid identities, foster deeper empathy, and awaken a shared sense of stewardship for the inner and outer worlds we inhabit together. The journey outward becomes, in the end, a journey inward. At the heart of Federico Faggin's proposal lies a revolutionary notion. All that is real is connected by a web of meanings, an immaterial structure that not only links thoughts and emotions, but could also explain one of the greatest mysteries of quantum physics: entanglement. This comparison between the semantic web and the quantum phenomenon is not a superficial metaphor, but a profound invitation to rethink the very nature of connection in the universe. Quantum entanglement describes a phenomenon in which two particles, once connected, remain correlated regardless of the distance between them. When one is measured, the other responds instantly. This behavior defies the logic of space-time and has led physicists to suggest that, at a fundamental level, the universe is composed of non-local relationships, connections that do not depend on time or space. Faggin proposes that this idea is not exclusive to the subatomic domain, but reflects the intrinsic nature of consciousness itself. In his view, conscious units, or centers of experience, are not truly separate, even if they appear so from an external perspective. What unites them is not matter, but meaning. Just as entangled particles respond instantly to one another, conscious entities would be linked by a network of shared sense, a hidden mesh that maintains the coherence of the universe. To imagine it, picture an invisible web stretching across the cosmos, where a subtle shift in one thread sends ripples through the entire structure. These ripples are not bound by speed or distance. They are immediate, as though the fabric of meaning itself were alive and responsive, carrying intent and resonance from one point of awareness to another. This network does not resemble a physical map or an electrical circuit. It is more akin to a constellation of meanings in which each point, each lived experience, both influences and is influenced by the others. Within this intricate weave, knowledge, intuition, empathy, and even love are not mere chemical products, but expressions of resonance between elements of that semantic network. Consciousness, according to Faggin, does not merely perceive this network, it participates actively in shaping it. When a conscious being recognizes a pattern of meaning, an emotion, an idea, a deep intuition, it activates nodes within the network, creating links that affect both its own perception and that of others. Here arises a fascinating implication. Our decisions, thoughts, and symbolic acts could have non-local repercussions on other conscious beings beyond language and beyond time. The network of meaning also explains why certain human experiences, such as art, music, or mysticism, seem to connect people from different cultures and eras. These experiences activate symbolic patterns that resonate within the shared semantic weave, producing a sense of unity that transcends differences. In this sense, the web of meanings is not merely an internal architecture, but a field of universal interconnection. Compared with the physical model of the universe, this semantic network introduces a completely new way of understanding causality. We no longer speak of chains of mechanical causes and effects, but of echoes and resonances of meaning. The why of things is not found in the interaction of particles, but in the symphony of significance that sustains the cosmos from within. From this perspective, the universe is no longer a machine, but a living work of art, where every subjective experience matters and where every conscious act modifies the fabric of the whole. This conception of the world is not incompatible with science, but it does require an expanded science, one that integrates the inner life of the being as an essential part of reality. Quantum entanglement left Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen perplexed, leading them to call it spooky action at a distance. Faggin does not see it as a ghost, but as proof that reality is not physical at its root, but symbolic and conscious. If this is true, then our lives are already woven into a vast, intelligent design of meaning. Every thought and gesture becomes a note in an unending composition, and awareness itself becomes a creative force. To live with this understanding is to participate deliberately in shaping the harmony, or the discord, of the universal symphony. The challenge now is to learn how to read that web, to live from it, and perhaps to awaken to the awareness that we are more connected than we have ever imagined. What if consciousness were not a byproduct of the brain, but the very origin of reality itself? Federico Faggin puts forward this possibility, suggesting that accepting it would radically transform our social systems, especially in education, healthcare, and politics. In education, Faggin envisions a pedagogy centered on the being. Instead of training minds to repeat information, he proposes cultivating self-knowledge and inner experience. Each student would be regarded as a unique center of consciousness, whose purpose is not to imitate, but to discover their authenticity. Skills such as introspection and empathy would hold the same importance as mathematics or history. In practice, this could mean beginning each school day with moments of guided silence, mindful observation, or shared dialogue about inner states, allowing students to explore not just the outer world, but their own awareness, and to recognize learning as a deeply personal living process. In healthcare, this integrative model would treat the human being as an indivisible whole. Modern medicine, focused on the physical, often ignores existential suffering. But if consciousness is primary, then symptoms also communicate lessons. Pain, rather than being merely suppressed, would be listened to as a teacher revealing deeper imbalances. The body would be recognized as the messenger of the soul. In politics, the transformation would be profound. If we all share a web of consciousness, then governance should not be based on competition or individual interest, but on service to the common good. Ethics would not rely solely on imposed laws, but on the intuitive recognition of the other as part of the same living fabric. Conscious politics would mean less conflict and more cooperation. Even the economy could be reimagined. Work would no longer be just a means of subsistence, but a path to inner fulfillment. Accumulation would lose its appeal in favor of caring for resources and expanding the being. Well-being would no longer be measured only in numbers, but valued as harmony between the individual and their environment. Faggin does not present an idealist utopia, but an evolutionary necessity. The current crises, environmental, social, existential, show that the materialist model is exhausted. Only a science that includes the inner dimension of the human being can offer solutions that are truly transformative. The urgency is clear. Without a shift in our collective awareness, technological and political advances will remain surface changes. The deeper transformation, the one capable of addressing root causes, can only emerge from individuals who recognize themselves as conscious participants in a shared reality. For Faggin, this revolution will not come from new technologies, but from a renewed consciousness, a quiet, profound, and necessary revolution. Modern science, as we know it, has evolved by relying on external observation, measurable objectivity, and the repeatability of phenomena. But what happens when the phenomenon under investigation is consciousness itself? How can we access it without reducing it to a formula or a brain scan? Federico Faggin proposes a radical turn, using direct subjective experience as legitimate scientific data. For this, a new attitude is required. One that abandons the view of ourselves as detached observers and instead recognizes us as conscious participants in the process. In this methodological shift, living consciously becomes the laboratory, and each moment of full attention becomes a source of invaluable information. A researcher might begin their experiments not in a sterile lab, but in the middle of daily life, observing the rise and fall of emotions during a conversation, or the subtle shifts in awareness while walking in nature, treating every ordinary moment as fertile ground for discovery. Faggin suggests that it is possible to cultivate an inner discipline as rigorous as traditional science, but applied to the domain of being. Meditation, self-analysis, and deep introspection would not be seen merely as spiritual practices, but as legitimate tools to explore consciousness from within. For this to work, however, the observer must purify their personal filters, the ego, conditioning, and reactive emotions. This approach demands radical integrity from the investigator. It is not about studying another person, but about studying oneself with total honesty. Just as a physicist refines their instruments, the human being who seeks to understand their own consciousness must refine their capacity for attention, sensitivity, and openness. Language, too, becomes a challenge. The findings of this inner science cannot easily be translated into formulas or graphs. They require narratives, symbols, poetry, even silence. Scientific communication would need to open itself to new forms of expression that honor the irreducible quality of lived experience. In this new paradigm, validation would not come from exact replication, but from experiential resonance. If an inner description awakens a recognizable truth in others, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Beyond personal insight, Such research could help shape more compassionate societies. As individuals learn to observe themselves without judgment, they may extend the same openness to others, creating a shared cultural space where empathy and deep listening become as valued as logic and technical skill. Thus, Faggin invites us to conceive of consciousness not as an impenetrable mystery, but as a living reality that can be known through awakening. Throughout human history, three values have guided the search for meaning: the good, the beautiful, and the true. For classical philosophy, these were lofty ideals. For modern science, they became subjective notions. Yet in Federico Faggin's vision, these three pillars emerge as fundamental expressions of a unified consciousness underlying all existence. From this perspective, the good is not an imposed rule, but a deep recognition of the interconnection between all beings. When we act from consciousness, our decisions naturally incline towards care, compassion, and cooperation. Selfishness and conflict, then, are signs of a fragmented or dormant awareness. In daily life, this might appear in the small yet profound choices we make: offering help without expecting reward, listening fully when someone speaks, or protecting the vulnerable even when it requires personal sacrifice. Such acts reflect a goodness that arises effortlessly from awareness. Beauty, in turn, ceases to be mere aesthetic preference and becomes a signal of inner harmony. What we perceive as beautiful resonates with the deep structure of the universe, where each part reflects the whole. In the gaze of a child, in a piece of music, or in an elegant equation, we recognize that implicit order which moves us without need for explanation. And truth, more than a verifiable fact, becomes an experience of inner coherence. It is not simply what fits the facts, but that which makes our consciousness vibrate with an unmistakable certainty. As Faggin put it, truth is not reasoned, it is recognized. These three values, the good, the beautiful, and the true, are not separate nor abstract ideals, but tangible manifestations of awakening. Each is a window into the greater consciousness that contains us. When we live from the ego, these values become relative. When we live from the self, they are illuminated. Faggin presents them not as static concepts, but as indicators of the degree of alignment between our individual consciousness and the universal consciousness. In times of uncertainty, recalling these values can act as an anchor. They offer a framework for decisions that transcend fear or self-interest, pointing us back toward actions and perspectives that preserve harmony, foster unity, and nurture a deeper sense of meaning. In this sense, they are not to be sought outside, but cultivated as an inner compass. And that concludes our video. If you enjoyed the content as much as we did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications to stay up to date with all our updates. Thanks for being part of our community. See you in the next video.